All right. Hello, hello, hello. And hi and welcome to this live streaming session, a quite spontaneous one in which we can do some Q&As if you want. You can put some stuff into the chat. And I also want to actually code on something, on some testing stuff that I will prepare, and then you can just watch and join if you like, and also have some updates for you. So yeah, let's get started. Feel free to use the chat as always to say hello, and you can also type from where you are watching. So hello from Vienna, Europe, and I find that always interesting to see where folks are watching from. And yes, so to get started, just with some news or some updates, what I've been up to, or if you've been following me on Twitter or elsewhere, you might have seen. So I actually am right now working on some online on-demand video courses on developer productivity, which I believe and see is a very important topic. So there is actually something that I'm sharing with, well, all of you, with everybody who's following me on Twitter and YouTube and so on, because this course, this online course that I'm preparing is not fully finished yet, but the early access is already available, in which you can actually provide some feedback if you want. So this would be ideal. And also you save some money. So you actually get a 50% discount of the final price, which, well, of course now means that you don't get the full course yet because it's not fully finished, but you will see all of the updates to this course, everything that is covered there. You can check out this blog post, and then on the course page you will see everything that is being covered here. So all of that curriculum that is currently being developed. Some of the lessons you can actually preview and watch if that is for you, if that is interesting. And yes, so again, you will see all of that update. Most of it, or a lot of it, is not fully published, so that is being developed as we go. But I wanted to share this early to just give you an early access and possibility to get some discount for my followers, so you can check that out if you like. All right, in the chats, servus as well. You should stream on Twitch, more viewers. Well, actually, good question. I once or twice tried that on Twitch. So I think now it's due to holidays. I got actually less viewers on Twitch than I got on YouTube, but also for now it's usually much less viewers than usually. I blame this for the hot weather, and people probably would like to enjoy the nature more than watching something here, which is totally fine, and people can watch the recording as well. So of course, since this is a live Q&A, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Like, and ask me anything, as always, when I do my streaming, and it's always nice to interact with people. All right, another thing that I would like to share is that I published some new workshop dates. So this is not on demand. These are actual, interactive dates. I would say in person, but it's obviously not in person, but it's live online via Zoom, which are 2 days of Quarkus workshops, actually 2 individual days, but you can also have a package in which you attend both. One on enterprise development with Quarkus in general. So it's basically a fully fledged Quarkus workshop on how to get you up to speed to develop there. So the first version of this was in July, end of July, and there was a lot of positive feedback. So I said, okay, let's do this again. It was nice. And testing as well. So this is the first day on October the 20th. This is basically what will be covered. You can check this out on my blog as well. And the testing is the second day. So that's a full day only on testing. Not only, but mainly for Quarkus applications, mostly for enterprise applications, but we will use Quarkus as examples, and we cover a lot of things to just see everything for testing. So that's an interactive Zoom workshop in which you can ask as many questions as you like. So that's the benefit of using these interactive workshops, and that's I think, yeah, quite nice to see. All right, then another thing that I would like to share for those of you, depends if you've heard about this time management application, Day Captain, that I've been started to share and build a business around last year, where I ask my followers to just give it a try. You can try that out for free and see how basically that works for you, because it is something like a task list and timeline combination that you can use with a keyboard concept. And the nice thing is that now, because it's a little bit, if you think like the Vim editor has a little bit of a steep learning curve, and then quite naturally it's not the easiest thing to learn into. But now, together with a friend of mine, we created some new intro material, so you can actually do an intro tour in which you can watch my co-founder explain stuff about how to use it, how this works, and things like that. So if you gave it a try, you can actually try it again if you like, just with this new intro tours. There are a few days available in which you see all of these content, and which should be a little bit more interactive to try that out and see how this goes. All right. So if you have any questions, then feel free to ask. Other than that, I would just like talk a little bit about what I otherwise plan to do on this in this session. So as always, it's quite interactive, and if you want to derail that topic, that's more than welcome. But other than that, what I would like to actually do or thought about today is to enhance my my content on testing, where I created some blog series and actually some videos on YouTube, which basically now makes that test environment available by using test containers. I know I've tried this already in a live streaming some weeks or months ago, and but now in a little bit more complex example that actually works with the same smooth developer experience that I'm actually doing in my workshop. So basically, what I would like to build up is a development environment in which you have a more complex setup. So, Hello World is always easy, but what about if I have an application, some database, some other stuff, and I want to run this, for example, locally using Docker or using test containers. And I also want to run this in a way where I don't have to wait. So for me, that's always a very, very important thing, that I don't make the developers wait by the turnaround time, which means you start a test and then you see how many seconds you have to wait until you actually get this. So what I'm doing, I have this, that's a system test for my coffee shop application. If you're wondering how that looks, you can check out that material on, this article series, and somewhere here in this hashtag there is also a video course on efficient enterprise testing. So feel free to check that out. That explains a similar thing and uses the same project. And now what I would like to do is to have a setup, rather than what I usually do is something like I set up some shell scripts and Docker run, Docker run, Docker run. But for me, that's very pragmatic and a very nice way, but I also understand that not all developers are familiar with that. So I've been using test containers in order to set that up, but that comes with some caveat, because I'm not the biggest fan of writing tests that actually tangle the test environment to the test life cycle. So for example, this is why my tests here are always plain JUnit tests. They're not annotated with anything, but they just connect to a system that is already running, which is a little bit of a trade-off, because then the system, I need to rely on that the system is already running, so it's somewhat an implicit knowledge. But on the other hand, then it's so much faster because I can quickly connect to something that's already there and I don't have to set up anything. So this works if you set up these Docker containers locally and they just run. So that's pretty well to set up, but then also, it's a little bit more stuff to do. If you would like to do this solely in Java, this also works. So and then you can do something like this. What I now would like to do is just make the config a little bit, a little bit more stable. So what I've previously had, and I already removed this because it's not like a best practice in test containers, is something like port mapping as port bindings, in which you actually can define bound or binded ports for local host, which the creators of test containers are not that happy with, because it should be idempotent, that I could run this again and the ports don't collide, etc. For which you're required to actually find out the port configuration. And what I want to do, what I actually want to build up in this live streaming, is that I make the configuration here, find out what the configuration is in my containers, and then basically, take it then from there and configure something where my system test can actually use. For example, as follows. Let me just run this. I already started this up front. Basically, you can say, what is the mapped port to these containers? So I have an example with 3 containers. I have an application that's called Coffee Shop, another one that is called the Barista, and a database for my coffee shop. And they are available via port 8080, all of them, but locally mapped is a port that will be randomly chosen. So then we need to, figure out which one that is. So once that is starting up, and that's also the issue already that I have, it takes a while to start it up, which is fine. So now it shows me the log of my application, which is fine, first of all, but then I don't want to, wait that long each and every time I run the test. There is a feature in test containers that is preview, something that is called reusable containers. I could use that so that then it detects if there was some changes and it actually reuses the containers and not stop them. But it doesn't work with a network. So I'm using, that's like a Docker network, that the containers can use each other and connect to each other using their logical, nicely readable name. So they have, it's not a container name, it's a network alias, because they all run in the same network, which is fine, but that makes, then right now I cannot, I think they're working on that, but right now it cannot be made reusable, which is okay, but that means I want to start up this example, and then this should be running, and then I want to configure that. Question in the chat, what's the reason to use WebStorm instead of Vim for you? I'm not using WebStorm, I actually never have. What you see is IntelliJ. I think WebStorm is based on the same engine, so that's probably why it looks like that. The reason why I use IntelliJ, because it's a fully fledged IDE. So I have the full, I use IdeaVim as you see here, but I have the full power of the IDE available. That's basically why. If you search on my blog for IntelliJ, or just Google my name IntelliJ, you will see on my blog a hashtag with the content. I have some videos where I explain why my setup looks like that and why it's efficient for me. Yes, so now it pastes here the configuration that I can already use. So for example, I could go to the browser and say, okay, this is, now that's a backend here of my application. And I think I have some index.html page or something like that, yep, where I can order some coffee. So this works if I find out the dynamic port, which is nice. But now I would like to use this from my system test. Now what I'm doing here, I fire up my containers. Now they are running, which is nice. I can find this out in Docker. So I have, well, you can see it a little bit weirdly. This is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 containers that I set up. One is this test containers helper container for WireMock, Postgres, and my coffee shop application. So WireMock, because that's a system test. So my the barista is actually a WireMock. And here you see this dynamic port mapping here, which is nice that this works, but then it also requires me to find out that port to begin with. So if you're in the same test, if I would use the same test environment and the test lifecycle, then I could just use this information and then connect to it, dynamically reconfigure my system test. However, I don't want that for the reason that I mentioned. So basically what I want to do is something like, and I already started hacking on something like this here. I would like to use this just as plain Java code and say, okay, connect us to something like localhost and then some particular port. At first, I have a system property which works well. I can provide this on the command line, for example. But if I run this in my IDE, it also works, but then I need some run configuration, which is not the best way. And also I need to manually configure it, right? Because then I start up this test containers class, this main method. I take this, copy and paste it, reconfigure my IDE, and the next day or the next working session I have to do this again, which is stupid. What I actually do, in my case, I want to use some features that are inspired by Quarkus. So the Quarkus config has multiple config sources provided by microprofile config, which I can use. Well, I did use system properties before, but I could also use either properties file, which would be one way, or something like an environment file. So I already started this. That's quite cool. I think you can do a .env file. That is some basically a Unix environment variable. So you can say, okay, set this environment variable, and now this is the same structure. It uses like this uppercase snake case here. And that actually can be used from within that URL. So I can say, okay, take this for the host config provider.get config is microprofile config, and then get the value for this particular value, which can be set. Let me show you this in two ways, or actually many ways, but this is one particular way. I can set this in the properties file in microprofile config. That's the plain name microprofile config. Then this works because I have, that is one implementation of microprofile config. Profile config. And with this, I can use that. And then I can override, if I want, here this host to foobar. I just want to try this out to say, okay, does it work to create and verify my coffee order here? So I can run this example. Now in IntelliHA, you can of course run multiple things at a time. So this main method is still running. We leave this running the whole time. And now it says, okay, connect to localhost. Failed. I mean, it's obviously the wrong port anyway, but I just want to find out what the host is. So host per default should be, yes, should be localhost. And then we do a second thing, for example, test host, test port, and that should be, let's say, 8080, which is also not correct, but just to start with, coffee shop test port. And then we can take this and try it again, and now it should, well, fail to connect to this port, and then we have something that we can work on. Question in the chat: how do you populate the database with necessary data before each test? After execution, how do you clean the data generated by the test mass? Depends. So what I do for tests, if I have some necessary data, what means necessary? Like necessary for the application itself to just live. What I do then is something like I want to populate or control how I start up my application, just with some base important data that my application needs in order to run to begin with. That is typically part of the lifecycle of the environment. When I start up something, then I say, okay, start up my application, my database, and then populate the data. Depends what is the most pragmatic way. You can do this from the outside. That's typically what I do. So I start up these two things, and then I populate the data, the database, either from a SQL script or from some, well, either in a shell script, or here I would use the test containers code to actually say, please populate that, and then the application can run. If you're talking about data that you need in a particular test scenario, that depends. I would rather, I mean, first of all, I would do it from your test code, because that is that should be populated then from the test and tiered down afterwards. The easiest way, if possible, is to actually use the same business methods like your test endpoints, like you would also do for a usual use case for your user, for example, to create something, create a customer, create some organization, coffee, whatever you have, and then use that from the test and delete it afterwards. That is one way. If there are no such adequate business methods available, then what you can do is to have some lower level access. For example, sometimes within my test, I actually have a similar thing here where I use the barista, which internally is actually a wiremark. And then I say barista, now answer for order, wait for invocation, which is a similar, like lower level tactic to kind of control it. In the same way, like it would tell your database, okay, now inject these data, now delete that data again. But I would do it in an abstract manner, controlled by your test, where it's readable and maintainable, and where you see what's going on. So that afterwards, for example, in a tear down method, you say, okay, this now should be deleted again. So that's usually what I do in this regard. I hope that answers the question. All right, and now what I would like to do is to have a look in my config. So that's one thing that I'm using here, this config properties, and now I forgot what it actually did. Oh, connect to localhost. That is actually the, kind of wrong one. I expected 8080, let's see. No, that's the wiremark, what it does. Okay, this is the second one. So I have two dependencies in my test, barista, and the other one is the coffee shop or coffee order system. Let's do a similar thing here. That's going to be a host and a port. Let's see, okay, this config should access the value that's now barista test host, barista test port. Now as an int and yes, and a string. And now I configure that basically from that config provider, which uses the microprofile config API. Question in the chat, what is the Vim shortcut to jump to method definition? That's not a Vim shortcut, that's the plain IDE shortcut, which is Control-B for Linux or Windows key mapping. So I think if you see it here, if you can read that, go to declaration or usage, see, okay, Control-B. And the same way you can go back for the implementation. So if I go to config provider, and well, then no implementation for this config should have an, yes, implementation, that's Control Shift, sorry, what am I pressing? Control Alt B. So some keys are so like obvious for me because I use them all the time. I cannot even tell what I'm pressing. I just do it. It's like muscle memory. Yeah, so that's Control B. You can right click, go to, and then see this. Or in IntelliJ, if you press Shift, then you can also say go to, you can type anything and it will tell you. Go to declaration or usage, go to class, Control N, and so on and so forth. So all these navigational shortcuts can be looked up if you just press Shift twice. That's like the magic key for find anything, and you can just type something like, how do I find my database configuration? It will just like, find it for you. That's quite helpful. Yes, so let's do the config here for these. Let's find them out and put them into our properties file like this. Host should also localhost, if I can type, and port, let's say 8080, which of course is not the correct one. So per default this was 8001 and 8002, which is also not the correct one, which is now what I would like to override. So basically what I would like to have, and that's now what I had in mind for this coding session, that I say my properties files, that should be somewhat the default, that should be taken, per default if I run it locally as Docker containers with a local host publish port. And now if you start the test containers one, it should write this file .env, which is an override. Why is this an override? Because you can provide a SPI, a Java service loader in microprofile config, in which you can say, hey, there is some cool thing that is called .env config source provider that is also available in Quarkus, by the way, which what it does, it basically allows me to load the same thing with a higher priority from this .env file that resides in the same directory. So this resides in the system test directory there, if you can read it, and has all of these things. It is the same naming convention like in the environment sources in general. Like if you know about microprofile config, then you barista, then you know this scheme probably, and well, how to use this, right? So now I just want to try this out and run my test again, which still will fail, but now it should fail with the correct configuration. With now I expect 8080 as a port. Why? Yes, because this actually overrides, if I'm not blocking the view, it actually overrides the port definition in the properties from this environment file, which is good for us because then the environment file can be written from our test containers test. So basically what I would like to do, and I now do this manually, I would like to override this definition with what is here in my config. I actually don't need to override the database port here because I don't need to access the database directly. It will be accessed from within the Docker network, which is nice because my application properties, my Quarkus application, actually directly goes to Coffee Shop DB, which is the container name or the network name of the database container, which is cool because then this works. All right, now finally, let's have a look. And it actually might already work. If I go there, then it should be able to connect to my application and say, yes, perfect. This worked. If I now go to my website and say, show the coffee orders, now it's there. There's an order, an espresso order from Colombia, which is preparing right now. So this worked, that's good. And also I can run this other system test that also accesses the barista system, my WireMock, and does some status updating. So tells my WireMock, please now respond in this way, and so on and so forth. And then this should work as well. So yes, this test takes a little bit longer. So usually I tell you your tests need to run fast. The reason why it takes longer is actually because of the business use case. So the use case itself involves some asynchronous processing and some asynchronous waiting for that reason, which is why, well, we need to wait for a few seconds in order to wait for the scheduler that works in the application. All right, so in the chat, I'm learning a lot from you. Thank you. That's very nice to hear. I think it's amazing to facilitate tests with containers like WireMock and test containers. Do you use the same approach to run in CI/CD pipeline? In general, yes. What I'm building up now is somewhat like for this answer, it depends, because usually, and that's actually the reason why I advocate to use something like, well, pragmatic scripts. Where is my script? Something like, building up my environment with just, Docker run, Docker run, Docker run. Why? Because I separate my test environment from the tests, which is very, very beneficial if you run the whole thing also in your CI/CD environment. Why? Because it's more flexible. That is actually the reason what I'm doing here with my config. I can go on my CI/CD environment, take the very same test and just tell it, hey, by the way, now point the config to somewhere else and just run the same test. Because my test is not trying to firing up some environment that might collide with my CI/CD server and so on and so forth. It just says, take this URL, connect to it, fire the test scenario, and done. Tell me if it works. So it assumes that the test environment is already running. This works actually really well in a CI/CD environment. If you ask me about WireMock, do I also use this there? Yes, because it's going to be the same test, like this particular test. I might have other ones, but this one uses a system test where my coffee shop system works as expected, and my barista system is swapped with WireMock. This works well here. Would I set it up with test containers in a CI/CD environment? It depends if that is the easiest way, because this would now work as a main main method here, and then I would need another way to kind of, control it or shut it down again. So actually in a CI/CD environment, I would still prefer to use either Docker plain or Docker Compose or either something else with Kubernetes. So this example, for example, which is what I'm also then covering in my Quarkus workshop, that's in October. This one works very well with Kubernetes. That you say you take the same example, instead of doing this, you use your YAML, you deploy it against a Kubernetes cluster, and then you run the same system test just against a differently configured URL. So this is basically that approach, and it works really well by separating these concerns. So that's why I'm usually advocating for that one. All right, so that's actually pretty cool. It worked faster than I expected it. Now what I would like to do, and that's just one more thing that we now have to figure out, is I would like to update this environment file, probably as you can imagine, from this test containers functionality. Because what happens if I now look into my running application and I stop it again, now my Docker containers should be gone soon, not immediately, but what happens then, this container, it's like a killing container. It then, if it doesn't have the connection anymore with my system test, now it just kills all the other one and itself, as far as I know. And then everything is gone. And if I start it up again, of course, I get a different config. So this is now what I would like to code as part of this session, that we say, please take this config, write it into the environment file, and then run my system test again, because then it reads the correct config. Make sense? I hope so. So let's see. This is the default config. We don't need this anymore. I can use, no, not the value. I can use the config here. This and this and this. It will be overridden. All right, barista system, same here. That works. Okay, then I have this. That should also work. Environment file. This should then be updated. And I use the test containers class to write something here. So, which is always a little bit tricky, is to find out how to actually, where I am in the directory. I think it should be in the current directory. If I say something like files and then a write file or append. So now, as part of this live coding, everything is really live. So I didn't prepare this. I actually have to find it out myself. If you have some other idea, or if you find some mistake, I challenge you to write into the chat. So you're required to help me. If I make some mistake, please let me know. So why doesn't it show my sources here? Hello. And or is this already source? No, I don't think so. Files append. No, that's test containers. Files append. I actually thought something like, yes, Java NIO append or write file. There was something like, yes, create file. No, write file. Yes, write the path, and then there is some, so path, let's say, path should be, let's say, .environment.env. Actually don't know if this is correct yet, but we'll find out. And then write some bytes, which is okay, or some lines, okay. And then some open options. Open option. Let's see what we have here. Read, write, append. Append, no, we don't want to append. We actually want to write it, and length is truncated to 0. Yes, truncate existing. That's what I would. It is open for write access, then it's truncated to 0, and this should be it. Yes. So I think it should be something like standard open options write and standard open options truncate existing, something like this. Please feel free to correct me. And I would like to write these lines. Okay, and it should be a list of string, of course. Something like, it's actually quite handy with this method. So I say, let's copy and paste this from here first of all. So that's why I'm using Vim. It's much faster here. So that's localhost. This should then be the port that we get from the mapping here. So basically this one, coffee shop mapped port. No, not here. That's the same there, which is the barista mapped port, and we don't need the database. So that should basically be this. I can ignore coffee shop URL. You know what, let's add the index HTML so I can click on it and I can ignore the other ones. Coffee shop URL is this one. And then that should kind of work. Okay, let's see. Add exception to method signature, yes, because I really don't care about this one. And then hopefully this already works. What I do now, just to test it faster, because you've seen that it takes a while. So I will just actually run this example without starting my containers. Why? Because then it's much faster. And I just run this in order to see whether my file has been written correctly. Map port can only be obtained. Yes, of course, I don't care. So try it again. And I just want to see if my, well, yeah, 10 seconds, if you, 10 milliseconds, if you don't do anything, that's obvious. And we see, well, okay, no file has been updated there. Let's see, there is another file. Okay, this one, it was the other one. It is the one that actually is directly in the project coffee testing. All right, because it is started here. Okay, that's interesting. Then we see we could do this coffeeshop.st, but I now suspect if I run it from different environments, for example, if I run it in the command line in Maven, because this is a separate Maven project, and it might take another one as this. Let's see, start it again, because now I would expect that it actually overrides this file. Yeah, it does. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So this at least works in that way already. And now, okay, let's stop it again. Now we can say, please start my containers again, all of them, and take the proper mapping, write it into the file, and then afterwards, my system test should work. Okay, this is actually faster than I thought. Who of you thinks this will work? Let's see. So now I have to wait some seconds again until it starts up my Docker containers, which of course we can watch by using the Docker command line. Just is starting up. So 2 of them are there already. Why? Because the coffee shop has the dependency to the other 2. So it needs to wait for the database and the barista to start up, which comes with some nice liveness probe. Or readiness probe actually. And now all of them are starting up, and it says, okay, starting took so and so long. I can use this URL. Now the old one doesn't work anymore. And let's see, it's now interesting. Want to see if I can create some coffee without changing anything myself. And it does work. Wow. Actually, didn't expect that it works that quickly. Usually when I do some live coding here, some streaming session, you can watch old sessions. We were debugging stuff for like half an hour. But now this worked quite smoothly. Just one thing that I would like to double check. If you have some other ideas, feel free to put it into the chat. I would like to see if it's just the best way to use actually the path like this. I could use an absolute path, but that is not that nice. I would actually like to say, well, if I start this from my IDE, then fair enough. But what if I now run this in, for example, on the command line? I actually, just for fun, I want to try this out, if that works. So we've seen that this already works. Let's stop the containers. And now just for, well, having a completely working example, what I would like to do, I would like to go to my system test, and there is actually, where is it? A test containers. This is the class that I'm using, which resides in the system test in this package, backend. Yes, actually backend is wrong. It should be in coffee shop here, because it regards all the tests. And then afterwards, I hope if I don't forget it, I have another cool feature that I want to show you. All right, let's try this out. Maven verify, and then we say, this actually works if you say test-d test, it runs only the test containers, as far as I know. And yes, that should do it. Let's see. So I want it only to start this particular class, but in this case from my command line, which would be similar to something that we could, oh no, test, is it test containers coffee shop? Okay. Or is it .java? It might be .java. National coffee shop test containers. But it does use work with wildcards. Nope. Fail of no test coffee shop. Okay. So I've been using this before. -d test with a different one. This was earlier today, so it says okay, backend ***, but I don't want to have other tests. So this works. Maven. I think yes, it was like, it was a weird thing that I need to provide the system property first. Nope. Containers. Java maybe. So you see, this is what happens with live coding. Everything will go wrong. Okay, there was a system property, I'm just not, and this should work, I'm just not sure about the syntax. I thought it includes using system properties, yes. Using test, include tests. If I search here for test, this doesn't help much. Configure class path, running a single test here. There we go. Test. Okay. Specific test case. Well, how to select it? That's what I'm doing. Maven test. Is it the fully qualified domain name? Oh, okay. Use syntax for test parameter. Really? With a slash? That's weird. What am I coding and what is Maven? As somebody in the MVN is Maven. That's a Java build tool. And what I'm coding is system test example for enterprise applications. So now just the thing is, what I'm a little bit confused. I could now replace this with these, but I'm quite confused because it actually should have worked the other way, what I did with other examples. Nope. So that's a little bit interesting. Maven test, I'm trying to figure out the correct usage. Test circle, multiple formats in one, so regex.class, fully qualified class name. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Test my package. Okay, there's something wrong here. Test. Let's do this again. Test is coffee shop test containers, and use that with .test. I should actually be able to remove the quotes as well in case that doesn't work. And just to double check if the test exists here. Sebastian National Coffee Shop test containers. Oh, now I think I know. I think it wasn't compiled. Nope. this might be actually an issue. Test classes, Sebastian Dashner, coffee shop, test containers class. Yes, that's what it should work. Interesting. So I'm open for all ideas if you have some. Let's try this again with this structure. Oh, class should work, yes. Maven test. Apache Maven, yes. Debug output, that's a good idea. That's always a lot, but what I usually do is I do the debug output -x, and then I pipe it into less or vim so I can actually read it. So test containers, okay. That's the debug property used, okay. Let's make this a little bit smaller. I hope you can still read it, but otherwise I can't. Display test. Setting system property, that's good. System test is this, okay. Okay, now let's go through it. Surefire test, okay. Nothing to see here. Included, no. Debug, what does it say? Yes. Coffee shop. Is this the, yes, that's the system test POM XML. Surefire reports. So this should work. Test containers. It's really interesting because this was never an issue. But actually what I would like to do now again, I like to rebuild the project again. Oh, Maven clean package, and skip the tests now just to not execute it. It would start up the same. Oh, now I know. Now I actually know what the issue is. Who can guess it? I thought this actually overrides the pattern, but apparently it doesn't. Test containers test, or you can also use integration test for test containers IT, but then it's not Surefire. Okay, now I think that was it. Problem with it, how this works, Surefire, or which is the default Maven test, expects, I think that's the structure, I'm not pretty sure. It expects that, no, not test containers, test containers test. It expects that the whole thing is called test, so it ends with test, T-E-S-T. And if not, then it's not executed. So now, now I seem to sound super smart, but it still doesn't work, probably because of the structure. Let's see. But it could not work before because it tries to ignore it. So it doesn't take it as a proper test here, but instead says, okay, just ignore everything that is not following this schema. And I think now the same issue that we had before, test compile, that it wasn't now compiled. So let's see if I was right. No, still not. Target test classes. Test containers test class. One last try. Dependencies added. Yes, good question, good point. But they are there because of the build, so they should all be available here. Is it really that the dot is giving a problem? But it worked like this before. Let's try it out with the class. If this doesn't work, then I really don't know. Then we have to end the session with this failure. So before I said everything worked smoothly, but you see, this is how usually these sessions end up. Okay, I really don't know. Like failed to, no tests were executed. I can check it again on the website here. So it says fully qualified class name is the test properties, which here is the dot, yes, and my package. I can test method. I can even set up. Oh, okay. You again. That is the second thing. Maven test itself should work. Yes, I should have tried that. No, it doesn't work. Why? Because it's not a test. Oh God, stupid me. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Now this should finally work. I know I said this now a few times, but it actually wasn't a test. So first thing is that I thought it includes test, and probably it does if I now just call it test containers again. Well, let's try it out here like this at first. And then let's see. So I'm compiling it, and now I'm including, I actually don't know even if the structure is now correct. It should, because I was pretty sure that it just works. Yes, now this works. And I was pretty sure that it also works in the other way with the dots. We can try this out in a second. Finally, oh Jesus Christ. Because then we see, okay, something is wrong here, that's okay, but because now failures, errors, container startup failed caused by, can't get Docker image. Oh yes, Docker file doesn't exist. That's the other thing that we see. Why? Because it's the same. I think now the path is basically ... coffee shop, because now we are in a different directory. This is now actually, but I think that goes too much for this coding session. This is now what I would like to resolve, that we make the tests somewhat not idempotent, but that we make the test configuration safe enough that we can say, okay, this works from if I started from any directory. Because it has the reference to the Docker file. Why it has this is what I want to show you now once it's running, because that's a very cool feature of Quarkus. And then we can actually access this file, and then we can use a dev mode of Quarkus. All right, so it might be the case that it only outputs something once, well, once it fails. Starting took... yes, because of this reason. So that was the second issue. So I'll promise to get a fix for this. This is now the different path where we say, okay, just go to this current directory because we're already in the st directory, and then run this file. All right, fair enough. Which, funny enough, works for the other, for microprofile config. So let's start it up one more time. Then this should work from starting from the command line, and then I have the same example that writes to the file and then enables us to use the config to read this and to read it from the system test and then to start it up. All right, very funny. If everything that I'm saying here doesn't make sense to you, you might, if you just joined later for the stream, then welcome as well to the stream. You might wind back and watch what we're trying to do, probably, because otherwise nothing makes sense here, what we're doing right now. So I can actually check out the Docker containers. Oops. Yep, this works well, or it looks good. Let's see, Docker logs of my coffee shop container. Where is it? Yes, it looks good as well. Creates the tables. And let's see. It doesn't output something, which could be a case of Surefire, actually, that it suppresses the output, which is fine, because we can still access the file and read it. So now that, yes, that's a different port, if you remember. Let's try this out. And it works great. Okay, cool. So my application is now up and running again. But now it has been started by test containers. And what I can do now from, of course, the command line or my IDE, I hope, I should be able to start my system test again. And then I just connect here and use the same, use the same example. Very cool. To the question in the chat, when is the Q&A going to start? It was starting the whole time. Just if you want to ask a question, feel free to interrupt and write into the chat. So some other folks already asked something. Please just feel free to ask any question. We are happy to interrupt and I'll answer. In the meantime, one thing I wanted to show you, this is the reason why I actually use test containers here in this way, that it uses this Docker file to build up my container in this generic container way. Why? Because this development Dockerfile dev, has one cool thing. It's where is it? Here it is. It uses it starts up my application in a mode where I can remote debug that as well, remote dev mode it. What that does, I can actually go and say now from my environment, that is now my coffee shop environment, I can actually say Maven remote, Maven Quarkus remote dev, here it is. I can go and you probably know Quarkus dev, which is this cool dev mode, but there's also remote dev, which works if I provide some other URL. And the URL I'm providing now is the one, let's take it from here, that is now where my application is running. And then this will connect into the running container that has been started by test containers. Why? Because then I can use the fully fledged examples or possibilities of Quarkus dev, which enables me actually not only to quickly run my system tests, but also to change what is running in my application. So now it has been connected to this remote server, and this is really, really cool, because what it does, if I say now that is my application that is running, and it gives me the default output, and if I actually now code something in my running application, so for example, I take the default output here and say add some hello world resource or output, then what it does, it takes this remote debug or remote dev, sorry, it says there are some changes in this class piece, please send it to the running Quarkus instance, and now actually my output has been changed. And that's super cool because I can take this environment, leave it running the whole time, and say, okay, if you now have anything that we would like to change, I can change my system test, I can run it quite quick, which is what I did here. I can do it again, so I can start this from my IDE or from a command line and do this here, or I can even change something in my running application, and then the development mode will just update this accordingly. Goodbye, and say, okay, run the test again, or run now this example again, and then I see quite quickly that the update here is there. That I think is really, really cool, and that's what I wanted to achieve, because now once I started up my environment and I waited these, I don't know, 30 seconds once, then I don't have to wait again during my coding session, because whatever I'm doing, I can very quickly see the output. And before I was doing this only with local Docker containers that have been started by the command line. Now that's a similar example that has been started by test containers. So in case you like, this Java structure or Java code more than Docker run, that's a little bit a question of taste as well, then this works really well, because now this also works with this dynamic example, which is what I wanted to do today, and I'm quite happy that this worked. Awesome. All right, questions in the chat. Can you use Wildfly instead of jQuery? I'm sorry, this question doesn't make sense. Wildfly is an application server, a little bit similar to Quarkus, and jQuery is a JavaScript, well, querying and a framework, actually, a JavaScript framework for websites. So the two are not connected, rather than they both have a Java in the name. But yes, sorry, I cannot answer that question. That doesn't, at least to me, doesn't really make sense. What's the advantage of this solution compared to a similar Jetty pre-integration test scenario? I don't quite know what a simple Jetty pre-integration test scenario is. I can tell you the advantage of the solution is that of such a solution in general, that I would like to create a system test that is not tangled to the test environment. So I don't want to have some test code that actually, once I start the test, just starting up some environment where this always takes a few seconds, like my 30 seconds that I have to wait for my database and so on, until I actually see the result. So I want to see the result very, very quickly, like I just did here. If I start this up, I immediately want to see if it's red or green. So just like here. And this doesn't work if you use any integration test or code level integration test technology. I'm not quite sure what Jetty does, but that is the advantage over, for example, using Quarkus test. Hi Sebastian, have you? I hope this answered the question. If not, then ask again, please. Have you ever used microprofile reactive messaging, or do you stick to plain CDI events? No, I have used it. The advantage is that the API is it's much more powerful. What you actually can do with a reactive, the reactive approach in general, and especially if you use it in combination with Quarkus, because it provides a lot of this plumbing logic where you can basically almost connect anything asynchronous to anything else asynchronous. So if you have some asynchronous JAX-RS resources, if you have some other reactive providers, and then internally in the application you can connect all these points. So that's very helpful for that. If I use a Quarkus, I am using this approach. For anything else, I actually do asynchronous CDI events just for reason of simplicity. So usually what happens in a business application that I say my business code does something, and then at the end I would like to have my event processed that just is being processed asynchronously for some reason. For example, I would like to send a message. I want to do something in a separate thread. And either you use a separate executor service or you throw an asynchronous CDI event. And that is just a very easy way to decouple that. So usually I actually use them. It's not really a question of stick to CDI events, like, exclusively use them, because it always depends what you're trying to do. But if it's a use case that is just very pragmatic and simple enough for asynchronous CDI events, I typically use them because they just are supported out of the box. Any runtime that provides a CDI support will work with them, and I think it's a nice and clean solution. OSC Quarkus was used instead for the question. Yes, it's not jQuery, it's Quarkus. Yes, I use Quarkus instead of like some other enterprise runtime for your question, Martin. And another question, but you must keep the Docker running to get your solution in such a short time, isn't it? Yes, correct. That's what my test is doing here. And the solution I'm doing now is... I know that's also still hacky. I say I wait for 68,400 seconds, which is 1 day. So I could also say you wait for user input until you press some key, but usually I just fire it up in the IDE and then I can stop it again or hit Control-C in the command line, things like that. But yes, they need to stay running. How this works in test containers is that if you start something here and then it will stay running and up and running unless the JVM shuts down, or if it's declared as a reusable container, it will keep it running. But usually it would otherwise stop if I then end my, it was a main method, now my test method here. So correct, this would otherwise stop and needs to stay running. All right, so I'm very happy that this now worked, and also spoiler alert, this will actually be some content where I will produce another video that I then post on YouTube, of course one where everything works already, so what you folks now saw in the making of then works better. And yes, this was very nice that this works already. Also, what I would like to figure out is just some way to make the paths here a little bit more straightforward. But that's something I need to dive into as well, where both the IDE and the command line solution basically starts from the same base path, base directory, and then this works as expected. All right, so do you have some other questions? I'm very happy how this coding part now worked out, actually. I have one more question in the chat. So in the old world, quote unquote, you would start the application server and after that start the tests. It depends what you refer to with old world. I mean, in general, you would usually need to start up the application server and then some tests. I mean, it always, first of all, it always needs to be in this order. Usually most frameworks or some solutions that are there in some Hello World tutorials, they say, well, use our fancy annotation, just put it there, for example, Spring tests or at Quarkus test, or actually same with at test containers. They will start up your environment, which first of all is very nice, but then by doing so they tangle your test lifecycle to the test environment lifecycle, which means if you start up your test, you start up something else. There are ways around it, so some of that technology is smart and say, well, if you start it up, I only need to start it up once, I can keep it running, I detect if it's already running, and so on and so forth. But that always comes with some trade-off. So either you need some few seconds or milliseconds to check if it's already up and running, or you are less flexible in case you run it in a CI/CD pipeline or in a command line. And what I would like to have is a pragmatic and flexible solution that uses just plain Java or just plain JUnit, which is actually why I built this configuration example today. Now, if you call this old or new world, it really depends. For me, that's a pragmatic way how to build them up. It is somewhat older because it runs with plain Java technology, so you don't need any fancy test framework. But in my case, in the long run, this is more pragmatic and actually more efficient in the long run. In the short run, it looks like more work, and it is, because if you run some test framework that starts up everything, of course, in the first run, that's much faster. But then the longer you work in a project, that really is not the optimal way, because you need to wait for that turnaround time, which is what I'm doing there. So in case you're interested in this overall topic, especially with Quarkus, you might want to check out the courses that I was showing in the beginning. So there's some new Quarkus workshops. It's getting late here. In October, where actually, especially on the second day, we do everything that you've just seen in a much longer and deeper dive on a whole day for just this testing. You can also check out my content there on the articles and some video course that you find on my blog. By the way, for the questions to IntelliJ, you also find IntelliJ. Let me check this here, all tags on my blog. It's actually this year that I included this blog type of engine, and then you will see some videos here as well, especially why I use Diavim, why I use IntelliJ, and so on and so forth. So you can try this out. All right, so with that, already over 1 hour. Do you have TDD tutorial for Quarkus, or should I watch this one again? Yes, so I don't have like a specific TDD tutorial of anything that I'm sharing in my content. Actually, it will be part of that workshop in October, if that might be interesting to you if you're using Quarkus. In general, for TDD, it's like, well, I have an opinion on that. It's very helpful actually just from a, how should I say, psychological perspective as a developer, the way how we write our tests. And if we follow test-driven development, that it always feels like we work more effectively, rather than if we write some software first and add or care for this tests second. Just in a way that we say, well, once I write my production code in such a way that my tests are green, I'm basically finished, because I wrote the tests up front, and I write the tests in such a way that they follow the specifications of what my software should do. So I really like this way of thinking, that you basically start from that perspective, you see what you need to implement, and once the tests are green, you're done. So this is somewhat how I like to think of TDD. But that's in general with test-driven development. That's not necessarily related to Quarkus. All right, so with this, I want to thank you for all your attention and questions. I think it's a nice time to wrap it up. Again, you can check out that content if you like. This developer productivity course that is already available, early access for my followers. Quarkus workshops, as always, blog posts and things like that on a YouTube channel. So if you haven't, you can actually subscribe to the channel, and then you can see all of these things that I'm doing around testing and all that content that I'm sharing here as well. So with that, thanks a lot for your attention, for all these questions. Stay safe out there, and yes, have a nice day or evening or wherever you are in the world. Thanks a lot for attending, and bye.